Okay. And Erin, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. And I will try to remember to look up and see when folks are in the waiting room and admit them as they come in. So thank you so much, Liz, for the introduction. I am Erin Gaines. I'm joined by my colleague, Nora Carlos from High Street Strategies. So High Street is a government relations consulting firm. We work with CSIN to help them advocate for federal policies that will make U.S. island communities more climate resilient. So today we're going to talk through CSIN's 2024 policy priorities and talk about the specific policies we're focused on this year and how we think we can make progress. So we're going to review the origins of the National Islands Policy Framework, and we'll go over the 7 key issue areas and discuss the specific policies that CSIN is working on to make strides in each of these areas. And I am going to share my screen so you all can see what I'm seeing. Can you all see that? Thumbs up, thumbs down? I guess I can't see many faces. Okay. Awesome. Wonderful. So just to start out, a little bit of background. Oh, and I'll reiterate what Liz said. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end. So save your questions and we'll look forward to that conversation. So the Climate Strong Islands Network was founded in 2019 because island communities in the US and around the world are really on the front lines of climate change. And so a strong network can help amplify their needs, your needs, and help build climate resilient communities. CSIN is governed by an independent steering committee and is co-hosted by the Ocean Foundation and the Global Island Partnership. So you can see on this slide, there are many other fantastic member organizations of CSIN. And if you aren't yet a member of the network and you would like more information about how to do so, please consider joining, and we'll have more information later on in the presentation about that. So I'm going to hand it off to Nora to talk a bit about CSIN and the National Islands Policy Framework.
Thanks, Erin. So before we dive into what's coming up in 2024, our policy priorities, I wanted to take a moment to recognize the main objectives of the Climate Strong Islands Network. So why are we formed? What are we hoping to achieve? And how do we get there? So first and foremost, we want to drive more resources to island communities. Next, we want to make sure that we're advocating for policy and legislation that are responsive to local needs. We also want to share best practices and highlight island success stories. And we also want to connect U.S. island champions to accelerate progress. So when Erin and I and the High Street team are working on behalf of CSIN, these objectives are in the forefronts of our minds. So, when we're talking to members of Congress or appointed officials, these are the things that we're thinking about and kind of guide our work. So the other thing that I want to remind us is kind of where we've been before we launch into where we're going. So a little bit of background, we see some familiar faces on the call. If you've been following along with CSIN from the beginning, we're so happy to have you back. And if you're new, welcome. Like Erin said, the CSIN steering committee was formed in 2020. And then in 2021, the High Street team was charged with developing a national islands policy framework. So how do we go about creating this national islands policy framework? Well, first we talked to folks. So we interviewed members of the steering committee and from people from island communities across the United States, and we started to gather their stories and started to hear about the challenges they were facing. So the question that we asked folks were, what's preventing you and your community from becoming climate resilient? So, despite these varying geographies, islands off the coast of Alaska, Guam, Puerto Rico, all over the world, really, we identified these 7 key issue areas that were preventing island communities from becoming climate resilient. So we kind of took each key issue area, articulated some of the challenges around that area, and then we identified policies that could be enacted to assist island communities to achieve climate resiliency. So we captured those issues, identified policy solutions, and that is now what we're calling the National Islands Policy Framework. So we released this framework, which I believe Liz just added into the chat, in late 2021. And since we have been using that to guide our work throughout 2022, 2023, and now 2024. So I'll hand it off to Erin to articulate a little bit more specifically about what those 7 key issue areas are, as well as the cross-cutting concepts.
Wonderful. So as you can see on this slide, these are the 7 key issue areas in the National Islands Policy Framework. We have clean energy, watershed planning, food security, disaster preparedness, marine economy, waste management, and transportation. So the policy framework includes a list of policy recommendations for each of these key issue areas. And CSIN uses the policy framework and these key issue areas really as a guide to identify opportunities to address and improve federal policies that impact island communities. So CSIN is using the framework as a guide and then building relationships with island champions and working with them to determine which policies are ripe for action. And then CSIN advocates on those policies. So we're focused on tackling challenges that all island communities face in order to help become more climate resilient. And we're going to walk through all of these 7 key issue areas and talk about the current policies that CSIN is engaged on in each issue area. But first, I just want to touch on these cross-cutting themes that Nora mentioned. So in all of these conversations with representatives from island communities, talking about the challenges that they face, we came up with these 7 key issue areas, but there also were a few areas that were kind of these bigger themes that really were weaving throughout all of the key issue areas. And we thought those were really important to kind of call out and use as sort of like a guiding light for a lot of the work that we're doing. So these cross-cutting themes, as we're calling them. The first one is representation. So we believe that island voices must be heard and taken into consideration in federal decision-making processes. And many of the factors that stand in the way of climate resilience are really out of the control of local island governments and citizens because they're governed by Congress and federal agencies. And so our goal with CSIN is to ensure that island voices are a part of these decision-making processes in federal agencies as well as in the legislative process. The next cross-cutting theme is development of island capacity. So we really believe that the greatest resource that islands have are the people who live on the islands and work for their continued success. So for US islands to become climate resilient, we need to make significant investments in the people and the capacity of these communities to support their economies and their environments and the work that they're already doing to advance their communities and make them more climate resilient. And then the final cross-cutting theme is access to information and technology, because like any community across the US, islands cannot become climate resilient and really advance their work without reliable and affordable access to information and technology, including broadband internet. So now we are going to dive into the 7 key issue areas, and I'm going to turn it over to Nora to start with clean energy.
Perfect. Thanks, Erin. So each key issue area starts with a statement about what the island communities need in order to become climate resilient. So for clean energy, we want US islands, they need local, independent, reliable, and affordable energy generation and community-based distribution systems that are locally informed and responsive to needs. Now, in our national policy framework, we have a number of policy recommendations that address clean energy. But for the purpose of today's call, we're going to focus on, what kind of our priority is for 2024 and how CSIN can engage. So CSIN's main priority for clean energy is to support the expansion of the ETIP program, which is the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project. It's a mouthful. But ETIP is a program through the Department of Energy in partnership with the national labs. ETIP supports U.S. islands to realize their clean energy goals by providing funding, technical assistance, and community guidance. So this year, CSIN is focused on ensuring strong congressional awareness for the program, garnering support for the program, and ultimately funding for the program through the appropriations process. So by working with congressional partners to support the ETIP program, CSIN can simultaneously discuss the unique needs that islands have in terms of clean energy, while also providing feedback to improve existing programs, likely through the Department of Energy, and also create new pathways that benefit island communities in the future. It's also worth noting that the Island Institute, a member of the Climate Strong Islands Network, is a huge participant in the ETIP program. And again, just kind of thinking about how we're following best practices and leading by example, this is a great program that works in island communities, and we want to make sure that more island opportunities have the opportunity to take advantage of this program. So that's the first one. Up next is watershed planning. So again, in order to become more climate resilient, U.S. islands need to use and develop available land within their islands' watersheds in ways that make them prepared as possible to weather severe storms and sea level rise. So this year, our priority to address watershed planning policies that impact island communities would be through WRDA, or the Water Resources Development Act. So for the last decade, Congress has passed WRDA every 2 years. And so this year is another WRDA year, and Congress will be working on this legislation for the remainder of the year. So the program, what WRDA does is it funds and authorizes the Army Corps of Engineers and their work in harbors, ports, waterways, and also informs their strategic planning, decision-making about which projects they're going to take on. So we're going to be working with CSIN members, congressional champions, and committee staff to identify opportunities to insert language into WRDA that would support CSIN's policy priorities and would help island communities with their watershed planning efforts. So WRDA is how we're going to tackle watershed planning this year. I'm going to hand it over to Erin next to talk about food security.
Great. So next is food security. So in order to become climate resilient, U.S. islands need locally grown agriculture programs and reliable food storage and distribution systems to become less dependent on expensive imports, become more self-reliant, and ensure consistent access to food even during and after natural disasters. So this is an area where we have already made some great progress in 2023, and we're excited for more opportunities in 2024. So last year, CSIN worked on 2 different policies that we're hoping will move forward in 2024, potentially as part of the Farm Bill. So the first is called the Grow Your Own Food Act, and this is a bill that CSIN worked with Representative Jill Takuda from Hawaii to introduce in the House. The bill expands the amount and availability of USDA grants to support locally grown food in food insecure communities like islands. Then also CSIN worked with Representative Nadia Velasquez on the Agricultural Representation for the United States Territories Act. And this bill ensures that territories are represented on the National Agricultural Research, Extension, Education, and Economics Advisory Board. So the role of this advisory board is to provide advice to the Secretary of Agriculture, switch my slide, and land-grant colleges and universities on top priorities and policies for food and agricultural research, education, extension, and economics. So it sounds very technical, but ensuring that island perspective is a part of that conversation and is represented on the advisory board is going to be really critical in ensuring that island needs are being addressed when it comes to research and education around agriculture related to the specific needs of island communities. And so again, we're hoping that we can move both of these policies forward in the 2024 Farm Bill. So next up is disaster preparedness. So in order to become climate resilient, U.S. islands need a functional and prompt response to any natural disaster with support from the federal government that recognizes the unique challenges that islands face when responding to natural disasters. So again, working with Representative Nadia Velasquez's office, along with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the CSIN put its support behind a bill called the Strengthening Capacity for Disaster Resilient Territories Act. And this bill was introduced last December. So, you know, we've all seen the news, and some of you live on islands and experience firsthand the climate change related natural disasters that impact your infrastructure, access to food and clean water, and cut off communication for island communities. So this bill would create what's called the Territorial Disaster Recovery Program to ensure more coordination, timely and effective response and recovery activities in the direct aftermath of a natural disaster in the U.S. territories. So this bill is bipartisan, which is wonderful, and we are going to work to continue to support it with the House champions to move the bill forward, as well as look for opportunities to find a Senate champion and to introduce a bipartisan Senate bill in the future. So that is our work focused on disaster preparedness for 2024. And I'm going to hand it over to Nora to go to our next key issue area.
Thanks, Erin. So next up is a sustainable marine economy. So in order to become climate resilient, U.S. islands need marine protected resources, resilient infrastructure, and sustainable thriving fisheries to support their marine economies and combat climate change. So in 2024, CSIN will be focused on finding opportunity to engage in several opportunities related to the marine economy. So we have two legislative vehicles that we're really focused on in 2024. So first is the NOAA Organic Act. So this bill kind of determines how NOAA, the agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, operates and implements its programs. So the House introduced its version of the NOAA Organic Act last year, and the Senate is currently working on its version. So CSIN is eager to engage with this bill and the bill sponsors to ensure the needs of island communities are considered and addressed, including the functionality of NOAA grant programs. Perhaps some of you on the call are recipients of NOAA grant funding, but this is something that comes up a lot for our different members. And the last time CSIN was in Washington, D.C. last spring, we met with committee staff and, in articulating some of the concerns that we had, they pointed us in the direction of the NOAA Organic Act. So we're excited to continue working with committee staff to add CSIN's input to this bill. Next up, there are several members of Congress who are currently working on issues related to working waterfronts. So really the infrastructure that supports a sustainable marine economy. So CSIN is, again, identifying opportunities to work with these champions to advance these policy in a way that considers and addresses the needs of islands. So preserving that infrastructure that's critical to island fishing communities from, say, development and tourism efforts. So there are currently, there were two bills focused on working waterfronts. One was a grant program, one was a loan program in 2023. And then moving forward, we know that a Senate bill is going to be introduced in the next few weeks. So we're working with those members on the Senate side to make sure that other key priorities are included in this working waterfronts legislation. So we're excited to get more involved in the marine economy in 2024. Now, the sixth key issue area is waste management. So in order to become more climate resilient, U.S. islands need long-term sustainable solutions to address the management of solid waste on islands. So for this one, while CSIN has identified specific policies to pursue and address in the first 5 key issue areas that we've talked about on this call so far, we have our different waste management policy recommendations, but we currently don't have a specific bill or a policy priority for waste management in place for 2024. Erin, can you flip to the next slide? So this year, CSIN is going to be working to identify what the most pressing waste management issues faced in island communities are, and we're going to actively look for, ways that we can add add in bill text, or work with Senate and House champions to address these challenges and improve outcomes for island communities. So we've, definitely heard about issues such as handling discarded appliances and electronic waste, and then are also thinking about opportunities to incentivize the circular economy. So these are all issues that we really want to address and are currently looking for the legislative vehicles to carry these priorities forward. So if you have thoughts or ideas, maybe in the Q&A, we can dive a little bit deeper, but would love to pick your brains a little bit more about waste management.
All right, our last key issue area is transportation. So in order to become climate resilient, US islands need sustainable transportation options that reduce emissions and ensure safe and reliable movement of goods and people on islands and between the islands and the mainland. So like waste management, CSIN doesn't have a current policy priority, a specific policy related to transportation that it's actively working on. So we're going to spend the year communicating with CSIN members and hearing about their specific transportation challenges and looking for opportunities to find solutions through policy changes. So similar to what Nora was saying with waste management, we are open to hearing about specific challenges and needs and ideas for policy opportunities that we can take on and champion going forward related to transportation. We know that transportation to and throughout island communities is complicated by geographies and weather and ocean conditions. And so we want to work to address these unique needs through policy if and when opportunities arise in 2024. So we'll continue to keep an eye on those and are definitely open to ideas. And then we just have a few additional priorities in 2024 that really encompass all of the 7 key issue areas and kind of harken back to the cross-cutting themes that we talked about at the beginning. So the first is the Insular Areas Climate Change Act. This was a bill that was introduced in the 117th Congress, but has not yet been reintroduced in the 118th Congress. But CSIN has engaged with the committee staff over the last year or so to offer feedback and elevate the issues and include the issues outlined in the national islands policy framework. And so we will be continuing to work with committee staff and ensure that CSIN's perspective and the unique island perspective is included, and that our specific policy priorities are included in that bill. So we're looking forward to continuing to work on that and hopefully see it reintroduced before the end of this Congress. And then the final note is just funding and appropriations. So this is something that is going to be in a place where CSIN can engage with members of Congress every year as they go through the appropriations process. So we'll continue to work with CSIN champions to identify possible appropriations requests, including any possible earmark requests, to support the agencies and the programs that most significantly impact island communities. And again, that's an ongoing conversation, especially as we're seeing now with, continuing resolutions that kind of carry the conversation forward and kick the can down the road. Essentially, appropriations is always at the top of mind for members of Congress. And so we will continue to look for opportunities to fund these really important programs that have all been addressed in all of these 7 key issue areas. So I will hand it over to Nora.
Thanks, Erin. So now that we've kind of shared which policies in our national islands policy framework that we're going to be prioritizing and really focusing on in 2024, I just wanted to emphasize, what showing up and what engagement really looks like. You've heard Erin and I kind of chat through some of these strategy, but let's, just kind of dive a little bit deeper. So number 1, we're going to continue to build relationships with key stakeholders, including island representatives, committee staff, and issue area champions. So as you all can imagine, when we're thinking about the territories, there are representatives in the House of House of Representatives, but then they're not voting members of Congress. So, we've built really strong relationships with those offices, but we also need to reach out to other folks who can champion these issues, who maybe have a strong preference for working on the marine economy or food security. Also, the territories don't have representatives in the Senate. So really working with Senate champions to get a bill introduced in both the House and the Senate to strengthen likelihood of passage. So, these are kind of some of the allyships and the relationships that we continue to work on. And I just want to continue to emphasize the role of committee staff. So a lot of these issues, all of these issues have, a committee of jurisdiction in both the House and the Senate. So it's really critical that you work with the committee staff on that text to ensure that the priorities that are important to you and important to CSIN make it through to that final bill text. And then, some issue area champions, there might be some unlikely allies here. You might have a representative from Missouri who's really passionate about food security and would love to carry, a bill along that has to do with island needs. So, Aaron and I are always looking for contacts, looking for opportunities, and again, presenting the National Islands Policy Framework as a menu of options. Great, you're interested in waste management. Here are the policy recommendations that we have. How can we work with your office to really move this forward? So those are what a lot of the conversations have been looking like. And I'd also want to credit our steering committee members. Last spring, they came to DC and spoke with many of these members of Congress, as well as appointed officials in the administration. And that's really where that relationship building started. And over the past year, we've been able to continue to build those relationships, check in with those offices. And we're planning on doing that again in 2024 to continue the conversation and to continue to advocate for the policy priorities that Aaron and I have outlined today. We're also looking for opportunities to engage in congressional administrative briefings. In the past, we've done briefings to the Department of State. We've done briefings to the Island or the Oceans Caucus, rather. So always looking for opportunities to elevate and make sure that CSIN priorities are getting out there and that folks are aware of what we're doing. And then we're also participating in the legislative process. So many of the policy priorities that we outlined today, like the Farm Bill, for example, are must-pass pieces of legislation. They're huge bills. And so, really just finding ways to make sure that CSIN priorities are included in those big packages is really one of the strategies and tactics that we're hoping to utilize in 2024. Not to say that we can't introduce other standalone bills, but that's a lot of what the efforts that we're working on this year are looking like. Finally, just wanted to say before we hop into our Q&A session that if you or your organization is interested in contributing to this conversation, perhaps your organization is working on one or a few of these key issue areas that Aaron and I highlighted today, we'd welcome your thoughts, your feedback, and ideas to strengthen CSIN's position. Aaron and I can tell you that when we're in meetings with folks, having anecdotes, having examples from island communities really make the difference, and ensuring the needs of these of the legislation goes forward. So we welcome those stories. And if you're interested, please consider becoming a member of CSIN and joining us. Aaron and I work very strongly with our policy subcommittee and our steering committee to make sure that we're going in the right direction and staying true to what CSIN wants to accomplish in 2024. So thank you all for your time today. Please stick around, ask questions. We'd love to engage and to brainstorm a little bit more. And I'll hand it over to Liz to facilitate this Q&A session, but please ask away.
Great. Thank you so much, Nora. And thank you, Aaron. That was extremely comprehensive and just a terrific overview. I also realized I did not recognize at the start of our call, as you alluded to, our terrific steering committee members. I did put a link in the chat so that for those of you on the call who want to see who is on our 11-member steering committee, as well as the staff that support that committee and our backgrounds, you can visit that link. But I do want to call out Lirio Marquez, who is on the line from Vieques today. Jason Donofrio calling in from the Ocean Foundation in Washington, D.C., as well as Jen Valulius, who is calling in from St. Croix today. So those are just three of our terrific steering committee members, all of which have been involved for the last 3 years in building up this network, as well as helping to produce and then strengthen our National Islands Policy Framework. So just a lot of thanks for them. I do see a couple questions coming into the chat now, and I will say for those of you that joined maybe into the hour, if you haven't already, put your name, organization, and where you are dialing in from today in the chat, please feel free to do so, just in the interest of sharing where people are from and maybe what their perspectives are coming into the call. With that, again, please feel free to put questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and you want to ask live, we're happy to call on you that way as well. Erin, I'm going to ask, maybe we take down the slide so that we can go back to faces. Excellent, thank you. And I guess our first question here is coming in from Ruben Flores, and he just asks, what's your plan to move forward now that Puerto Rico is slated to conduct its general elections next November? That is a very big question, Ruben, and I'm wondering if there's any kind of further clarification or specific points that you would like for us to respond to in that regard.
So actually, good afternoon, everyone. It's just based on personal experience, having worked for the government on the island about a decade or so ago. It tends to be that whenever there's an election coming in, a lot of the great efforts like this are just put aside. So, it's a really important matter to consider as, with climate change, things in terms of disasters and what have you will become more harsher for the community, but also on the statewide level, the capacity to understand the nuances. So, I would really hate to see that all the great effort that you guys are working towards just gets put aside and say, you know what, that's really not what we're thinking about. So, I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
I can touch on that a little bit. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it's pretty universal when it comes to election years generally, particularly during a presidential election year when there's just a lot of, political rhetoric happening kind of across the board. And there's a lot of partisanship that's starting, it's already there, but it shows its face a little bit more during an election year. So it definitely will be a challenging year, I think, really on any policy, and particularly, when you look at the congressional calendar, there's only about 130 or so legislative days this year, which is not a lot. They're going to be in recess for, most of all of August, all of October leading up to the elections. And then you have, the possibility of a lame duck Congress in the later part of the year after the election. So, but there are always things that have to get done, no matter what party what party is pushing it. So the Farm Bill is a good example of that. It is considered a must-pass piece of legislation because it is so important to the constituencies of all members, and Republicans and Democrats alike have programs in there that their constituents rely on. And so that bill is going to be critical and something that will move forward. The National Defense Authorization Act is another one, NDAA, that you hear about every year, appropriations bills, we have to fund the government. So there are things that have to happen. And so working within the world, the sphere of those bills is, particularly in an election year, that's really going to be our focus. So what policies that CSIN supports that are, that point back to the policy framework and the 7 key issue areas, which of those policies can we try to insert into those larger conversations of those must-pass bills so that we can try to make progress even in a really difficult political year. So that's kind of the game that happens. And then, you know, in a new Congress, there's challenges there too, depending on, you know, whether or not the House or the Senate flips, or there's a new administration that comes in. There's going to be kind of an intro period for, you know, okay, who, you know, which of our supporters are still around, and who's new, and who do we need to build new relationships with. So it's kind of a constant game in that sense. But you know, an election year makes it you know, challenging, but also there are definitely still opportunities to move good policy. So we don't want to get you know, we don't want to get too you know, sort of skeptical about the whole process yet. We try to remain optimistic and continue to push CSIN's priorities, no matter what the political sort of scene is happening in Washington.
Thank you for your answer. So, you know, as a practitioner over in the island, but also stateside now, it sounds great as a plan for this, you know, statewide, but that's not necessarily the reality of how things play out in the island. So I just want to make sure that you guys kind of like understand that perspective. Thank you.
Liz, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Nora. I was just saying, Ruben, thank you so much for that perspective and insight. I think what has been something that has been helpful for us as we're transitioning in these election cycles and always is, as you probably saw in the steering committee, for instance, Brenda Torres and Liro Marquez are coming from Puerto Rico, coming from very different organizations, but very complementary in terms of mission and commitment to making life better for Puerto Ricans, either on Vieques, the main island, or even, you know, our friends on Culebra as well. So I would say if there are particular issues that you are really hoping that we hone in on, certainly contact Erin and Nora, but do be in touch with Lirio and Brenda too. As you know, we are in constant contact about especially in this year with so much change going on, how we need to pivot and how we need to be strategic. Kate Brown, I see your hand up. Thank you.
I was just going to make a comment on Ruben's really awesome question. I think it's the issue basically everywhere on every initiative. And there are some good examples where islands have tried to create structures that go through different political cycles. And so it might be worth looking at some of those and seeing whether that makes sense in a Puerto Rico context. And I think as well, I was just going to comment that the existence of this group in Climate Strong Islands Network in itself will help a little bit with that. But I think, you know, the stakes at the federal level of the election are so high that it's not kind of like going to be normal. So we're kind of going to think about that as well. But and then how can the rest of us with examples and with both external support help Puerto Rico through that transition in an effective way? I kind of really hear what Ruben is saying there. So that's something I think that maybe CSIN can think about as well as this excellent work with the policy stuff, but where are there good examples of how you maintain effort in these things that are really kind of systematic and important through changing political cycles. And I can name a few places where we've seen effort to do that. And so maybe those might be some good case studies for that.
Kate, fantastic. And I will highlight, I know you didn't introduce where you're coming from, but for those who don't know, the Global Island Partnership is the organization that Kate is executive director of. And we also have Paula Lewis on the line from that terrific international organization. They are our partner at the international level. And I will note, I know we have folks from the US on the call today, but we also have folks calling in from elsewhere in the world. And I think what Kate, what you just touched on is has been such a hallmark of our partnership, but also something we want to continually expand, which is learning from others. We don't have all the answers here. And I think what Nora and Erin touched on today highlights, what we know at this current time, but we're constantly learning and we're needing input from other places in other contexts, because too, the climate is rapidly changing and we need to understand how we're needing to respond to that in the short term and the long term. So, for folks listening on this call currently, as well as in the recording, please know that we are always open to sharing ideas. I know GLSPA has an incredible program called Bright Spots, where they share, I think quarterly, a webinar where it's peer-to-peer sharing of best practices, solutions, as well as like critical challenges. We are doing the same this year in a domestic capacity. And so we would just ask if you do have projects that you have going on that either relate specifically to policy items that we addressed today or other concerns that are systemic related to climate resilience. We'd be happy to highlight those through the network, again, either through a live conversation or through our Inspired by Islands page, which is in our website as well. So with that, I know I saw another question in the chat, or a comment question from Joe Saltzman. He is patenting a new energy system, and he's interested in collaborating regarding the design of it and how islands can be more self-sufficient. Joe, I can give you a minute or two if you want to kind of give some background on your project if you'd like, or if there's anybody who is interested, if they want to connect with Joe in the chat expressly, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, it's just it's a wave energy system that what's special about it is it extracts energy from the wave on both the upstroke and the downstroke, and it's been published, and I'm expecting a patent sometime in the next couple of months. But we're getting through the red tape and trying to get the design realized and put into drawings, and finding commitments to developing and the funds and grants and all that good stuff. It's kind of overwhelming. I'm just an old-fashioned engineer, so anything we can do to collaborate and point me in the right direction to find resources and support would be great.
Joe, thank you for sharing that. And I will say, we mentioned GLSPA, the Global Island Partnership, is one of our organizational partners kind of in the network of island and climate resilience spaces. The Local 2030 Islands Network is another organization that we have a close tie to, as does GLSPA. And I will say we have a couple representatives from their group on today, especially Erin Darrington, who leads up one of their communities of practice, where practitioners do share kind of technical know-how on a whole range of topics, many of which coincide with our 7 key issue areas. But Erin, if you want to connect with Joe in the chat about any of this, I feel like that would be a great venue. But of course, Joe, we're happy to share any information you have in our network as well. And I will say, I'll put my email in the chat at the end, but certainly go to our climatestrongislands.org page, and we have our contact information there as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and I see actually Kate, thank you for responding there. Kate Morrison, who is calling in from the Ocean Foundation. Thank you, Kate, for joining us. Has a great question, which is, yes, we've been going strong over the last couple of years, but where are we going? How are we growing our membership? For those of you who know CSIN, you know that, again, there's right now an 11-member steering committee that is representative of many territorial island community-based organizations, as well as those islands that are related to states. We have 3-year terms for steering committee members. They can serve up to 6 years with 2 terms. We also have 3 subcommittees that steering committee members belong to, but also general members belong to. And we have been recruiting through our policy subcommittee for folks who are affiliated with local community-based organizations, or in some cases, regional organizations that are serving island communities expressly. For them to join our subcommittee, we meet monthly, and much of the work we do there then feeds into what Nora and Erin addressed on our call today. So certainly we are recruiting through that method and our community outreach method. But Kate, your question is so timely because we are going through a membership drive right now, and we are doing individual invitations through other island networks like the Great Lakes Island Alliance, which represents islands in the US as well as Canada across the Great Lakes states. We have heavy outreach in the Pacific Northwest, the Gulf, and the Southeast, as well as a continued outreach in the Pacific. So for those of you on the call today, if you're interested in getting involved, membership is free. We just ask for your time and talents in return, and we would love to have a further conversation with you about how you can best plug into the network and how you can help advance our collective mission. So Kate, thank you for that question. Anything else you want to add, or shall we keep going? Okay. And then I see another question here about how do you value the proposed Farm Bill approach to climate change and island realities? This is also a big question. Nora, Aaron, and I guess for JF Porto, who posed the question, is there any further information that you'd like to provide related to the question? Okay, hearing none. Nora, Aaron, do you want to take a crack at this?
Sure. Maybe Aaron, I can start us off. But so the Farm Bill approach, I guess, Farm Bill is huge. There are many titles within the Farm Bill, forestry being one of them. So there's a lot in the Farm Bill. So I think, our approach is kind of like scanning through and seeing where there are opportunities to, maybe wordsmith and say, include territories and, in looking at our food security policy priorities, the process that Aaron and I followed was looking at our policy priorities, working with offices, kind of saying, hey, these are some things that we'd really like to push forward into a bill. So we worked with offices on legislative text for the Grow Your Own Food Act and for the Ag Representation in the Territories Act. And so those two standalone bills, our hope is that we can make sure that they're both included in this larger package. So as you can tell, we have these 7 key issue areas. There's a lot to work on, and the Farm Bill is still front of mind. It's been stalled a little bit. Last fall it was supposed to pass the end of this year. Now we're in an extension. So I think, our approach is that, climate change and island related issues are included in the Farm Bill. So we're doing our best to make sure that they're being addressed positively this Farm Bill. So hope that answers your question. But if you have anything else to add, Aaron, or if there's any other thoughts that you have there, Joe, let us know.
And my only additional thought there is just that the Farm Bill will fund many climate-related programs that were created by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. And so one of the strategies is to work to ensure that those programs remain funded through the Farm Bill, and that funding for those programs doesn't get sucked away and put into other non-climate related programs. And so not only ensuring sort of that island perspective, but also the overall climate perspective, that climate related programs continue to be strongly funded, and that funding doesn't get taken away from them and put into other non-climate related programs.
Great. Thank you for that response, Aaron and Nora. Any other questions? I felt like we flew through this hour and have gone over so much information, but the questions have been fantastic. So thank you so much for all of you that have contributed. I should note, we keep saying, hey, you can be in touch with us. And in fact, you can via email after this call. We will also have a recording available via our website and our YouTube channel. But again, our website is climatestrongislands.org. You can reach me at elizabeth@climatestrongislands.org, and I'm putting both of those in the chat. As we finish up this hour, again, we would not be able to do this work without our incredible leadership Again, for those on the call, Kate Brown and Jason Donofrio serve as advisors. Jason is also on our steering committee, Lirio Marquez, Jen Belulius, as well as a whole host of others from Guam, CNMI, St. Croix, Vieques, Puerto Rico, the main island of Puerto Rico, and others, as you'll see in the steering committee list, are our lead advisors and have really helped guide us through this process. So again, if you are interested in joining, if you know someone who should receive this information or who's working on complementary efforts, we would love to be in partnership and further that good work together. So as you leave the call today, please let us know, be in touch. And certainly if you don't receive our monthly newsletter as well, do sign up for that via our website. It contains not only policy updates, but also stories of local island leaders who are doing innovative or who are in the midst of innovative strategies, both planning and implementation for projects in their communities. So there's learnings there. There's also grants and other financial resources that we highlight for local island community-based organizations. So do feel free to sign up for that newsletter. We promise not to abuse your email address, but just send you an email once a month with that information. So with that, any other questions before we close out today? Okay, hearing none, we're going to close out the webinar for today. Again, please connect with us on social, via our website, and we will have more webinars upcoming this year, and especially telling stories of some of our members and how they are navigating some of the challenges that you heard about today in the key issue areas. So do be in touch. Have a great rest of your day wherever you're calling in from, and we look forward to be in touch with you. Take care.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks all.